the other day. One more hour later, when Talkative Tortoise paused again, the swans told Talkative Tortoise to bite onto the middle of a long stick and make sure he kept his mouth shut. Then one swan took one end of the stick into her beak, and the second swan closed his beak onto the other end of the stick. They flapped their wings, and nothing happened. Talkative Tortoise was too heavy. People who talk a lot tend to eat a lot, and Talkative Tortoise was so fat that sometimes he couldn't even squeeze into his own shell. The swans chose a lighter stick. Then, with the swans biting either end of the stick, and Talkative Tortoise biting the middle, the two swans flapped their wings as hard as any swans have ever flapped before, and rose up into the air. With the swans rose the stick, and with the stick rose the tortoise. This was the first time in the history of our world that a tortoise ever flew. Higher and higher they soared. Talkative Tortoise's lake grew smaller and smaller. Even the huge mountains now seemed tiny in the distance. He was seeing amazing sights that no other tortoise had ever seen before. He was carefully trying to remember it all, to tell his friends, of course, when he got back home. Over the mountains they flew, and then down to the plains. All was going well until about 3:30 in the afternoon they passed over a school where the children had just come out. A small boy happened to look up. What do you think he saw? A flying tortoise. "Hey!" he shouted to his friends. "Look at that stupid tortoise flying!" The tortoise couldn't stop himself. "Who are you calling, oops, stupid?" Splat went Talkative Tortoise as he crashed to the ground, and that was the last sound he made. Talkative Tortoise died because he couldn't keep his mouth shut when it really mattered. So if you don't learn how to keep quiet at the proper times, then, when it is very important, you will not be able to keep your mouth shut. You might end up as a hamburger patty, like the Talkative Tortoise. Author's note. This story is based on Jataka story number 215. Free speech. I am surprised that speech is still free in our modern market-driven economies. It must only be a matter of time before some cash-strapped government regards words as another commodity and puts a tax on speech. On reflection, it might not be such a bad idea. Silence would once again become golden. Phone lines would no longer be tied up by teenagers, and the queues at supermarket checkouts would flow freely. Marriages would last longer, as young couples simply couldn't afford the cost of an argument. And it would be comforting to consider that certain of your acquaintances would be contributing enough public revenue to supply free hearing aids to those they have deafened over the years. It would shift the tax burden from the hard workers onto the hard talkers. Of course, the most generous contributors to such a splendid tax scheme would be the politicians themselves. The more they argue in Parliament, the more money would be raised for our hospitals and schools. How satisfying a thought. Lastly, for those who might think such a tax scheme impractical, who could afford to argue vigorously against it?